Good evening. Welcome, everyone, to the service this evening. Looking forward to this evening. I'm just going to say just a few things before we sing a song. I grew up, obviously, our families were good friends with Corny's, and grew up visiting. I was at Corny's house all the time with Fred and Dorcas. Sorry, it's Dorcas. It still is, not Gail to me, but had a hard time with that. But and Lisa, too, the older ones. But have a lot of fond memories of playing basketball and swimming in a pool, having a lot of fun over there. But as I grew older, gained kind of a new appreciation for Corny and Ida. Ida, of course, if you needed anything with music, I'd call Ida. She had it somewhere in a file. Somewhere there's a song that it didn't matter what it was, she had it. And so appreciated that, and just the support that Corny's had showed here for the church, and really appreciated that as I got older, just gained a new appreciation for Corny and Ida. So looking forward to tonight, and a song that I thought about that fits maybe your story is number 825. So if you want to turn to that, it's a song called Each Step I Take. I know that he will guide me to higher ground he ever leads me on, until someday the last step will be taken. Each step I take just leads me closer home. So let's sing 825.
Each step I take, my Savior goes before me, and with his loving hand he leads the way. And with each breath I whisper, I adore thee. Oh, what joy to walk with him each day. Each step I take, I know that he will guide me to higher ground. He ever leads me on, until someday the last step will be taken. Each step I take just leads me closer home. At times I feel my faith begin to waver, when up ahead I see a dazzle wide. It's then I turn and look up to my Savior. I am strong when he is by my side. Each step I take, I know that he will guide me to higher ground. He ever leads me on, until someday the last step will be taken. Each step I take just leads me closer home. I trust in God, no matter from what may, for life eternal is in his hand. He holds the key that opens up the way, that will lead me to the promised land. Each step I take, I know that he will guide me to higher ground. He ever leads me on, until someday the last step will be taken. Each step I take just leads me closer home.
Good evening and welcome to each one. Thanks for coming out tonight. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you, family, for supporting your mom and dad in this. We appreciate that. I want to read a couple verses just to kind of stimulate our minds. I'll be reading out of Genesis chapter 12, the first 9 verses. You can follow along or look it up however you want to do. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. And Abraham passed through the land unto the place of Sychem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he builded an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Tonight we're going to hear about a life journey, and we're all on a journey. Each one of us, from the time we're born until the time we die, we are on a journey. And like Abram, the path isn't always clear. We don't always know where it's going or how the Lord will lead or where we'll end up at on this earth. We can know where we're going to end up after this life if we live for the Lord, but we are on a journey. And so there was a couple points here I'd like to point out that we can, as we take our journey, that we can experience or should experience in our life. Number one, God told Abram, leave. I want you to leave where you're at and go to a place I will show you. He didn't really tell him, I don't think, where he was going. But we know that God was faithful. That's the number one point I'd like to bring out. God's faithfulness, he does not ask us to do something he doesn't also provide what we need to do it. And so God is faithful in that. And then number two, in verse 2, and thou shalt be a blessing. God intends for me to be a blessing to you, for you to be a blessing to me, and for us to be a blessing to those we come in contact with. So let's remember that as we journey to be a blessing, not be a hindrance, not be a discourager, but let's be a blessing and an encourager. And then number 3, when he came to one place there, he built an altar to the Lord. Then he moved on, and the next place he also built an altar. And I think that was a form of worship, of honoring God. For us, I think we can use that as a type of thanking God as we have experienced his blessing, his provision for our life, his watching over us. We should stop to thank him and to praise him for what he has done. And then it says Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Now, if I understand right, Corny started north, 2 and headed south, and it seems like that's kind of the way to do. A lot of people today like to go south, especially when it's winter. So, okay, let's stand. We'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll have Corny come up and share. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your presence here. Thank you that as we are on life's journey, we don't have to fear, we don't have to be anxious. We can trust you because you are trustworthy. Bless Corny as he shares tonight. Help him to be relaxed and be able to share. And may we be blessed and encouraged in our walk with you. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Corny, you can make your way up.
looks like you're all looking this way. Are you looking for something from me? 79 and a half years crammed into a half an hour or an hour, something like that. Is that possible? I have a question. How many of you knew General Benny Earl's Camp? Earl's Camp. I think he was from Indiana. Very interesting gentleman. He went on a trip to Holy Land one time, years ago, and when he came back, he was asked to give a report on the trip to Holy Land. And the first evening, he got all the way to New York. So I don't know how many evenings this is going to take. But I think I was told that he made it in 2 more evenings. I think it was 2 more evenings that he finished up on his trip. However, I won't keep you that long. And I don't know really what you expect to hear, what you want to hear. Whatever I say, some people will say, hey, that's interesting. Somebody else will say, well, hey, you wouldn't need to say that. So I hope this is going to be a talk of, what would I say, to somewhat inspirational, educational, and one and all. However, my grandpa, on my dad's side, married a widow with, I think, 5 children, 3 girls and 2 boys. And then my grandpa and that widow had another, I think, 4 children together. And then the widow, the grandmother, passed away. So my grandpa remarried a Penner lady, and they had 4 boys with her, which now he had a family of 13 children. And unfortunately, the first set of children were no blood relation between brothers and sisters with the last ones. You get it? It changed complete family. And yet they were brothers, they always considered themselves brothers and sisters. And that's how it should be. But yeah, and I came in, my dad was born with the first lady, but my grandpa, C.K. Friesen. And that's where I inherited the name, I'm sure, because his name was Corny K. Friesen. And K, I think, was part of Clausen. And my background, the person's middle initial was always their mother's maiden name. That's why my middle initial is R, which stands for Reimer. And you talk about tracking relations down that way, you can backtrack it. It's a lot easier than any other way that I know of. Anyway, that is my story on my dad's side. My mom's grandpa was 16 years old when he came over from Ukraine. And he married when he was, I think, just before he was 20, if I remember correct. Now, if I would have my older brother here and some older people, they would probably say there's different things I said wrong, and if I say it wrong, if there's something wrong, why, I tried my best. He was 16 years old when he came over and married, I think at 20 or just before 20. And I could have looked it up in a book, but he didn't, but I think he had 6 children with his first wife, 7 maybe. And then she passed away. He hired a 16-year-old girl to take care of the family, because here's a bunch of little kids that need to be taken care of. And within 2 years, they fell in love and they married. So they had another couple more children, which the total amounted to 20. So, but that is where my mom came in. And my grandpa came in with the first batch of 6 or 7, I forget for sure what it was. That's where my grandpa came in. Now, I was born into a Christian home, conservative Mennonite, what I would like to call it. A church was concerned, but not going too fast. We're kind of holding back on the worldly advances, such as when the reapers came out. This was before my time, but this is what my uncles and grandpa whatever talked about, which today we might call them harvesters, and maybe we'd call them binders. I guess there was a member, a few in the church, which church, I don't know, but there's a number of Mennonite churches. They have, 1 or 2 members had bought a reaper. So the ministers felt there was their responsibility to kind of slow it down a little bit, to not being too aggressive. So a minister gets up on Sunday and announces to the church that with the reapers out, they feel that unless you have a certain amount of money to put in the church offering, which one guy told me $100, another guy said it couldn't have been 100 because it was too much money in those days. He thinks it was 20. I don't know what it was. But unless you have $100 to put in the offering, he don't think you should think of buying a reaper. And he was very successful. The next Sunday, they had a whole bunch of $100 bills, or if it was 20, it was 20. And the reapers were in. So, and that's probably, you probably can relate to the idea of trying to hold back a little bit. My grandpa, as I remember what Dad was telling me, he bought a brand new car, and it was a Ford, by the way. I think it was Ford, before my dad got married. But the church had somewhat a understanding that they encouraged people to wait until car was like 4 years old. They preferred if you would hold off until car was 4 years old, not to have a brand new, the most advanced car, because that was an advanced thing in those days. Anyway, there we go. I don't remember anything of before I was born. But my mom said I was impatient before I was ever born, and she said I never changed. She said I didn't wait for the doctor to come around. I came around before the doctor got to the door. And by the way, a lot of you young folks, or younger people, you probably don't realize, but in those days, whether it was here or Canada or wherever, you didn't go to a hospital to have a baby. You went to the hospital if you were sick. And my grandmother, just like a year and a half before I was born, she had cancer, which was actually my step-grandmother. She had cancer. She was in the hospital, and she delivered a baby, I think a day or two before she died of cancer. They said she did not die of delivery, she died of cancer. Here I have an uncle that's a year and a half older than I am that was actually born in a hospital, which was rather unusual. So, when my brother Klaus was to be born, my dad took me to my uncle's place, uncle and aunt, and their place was actually, this was in the wintertime, in March, and they were logging or cutting pulp. I think it was pulp, and I think pulp is used for the paper industry, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I was taken to my uncle's place, and I was almost 4 years old at that time, just before I was 4 years old. I wanted to go along with my uncles, my Uncle Klaus and Aunt Annie. They were the house parents, so to speak, or she was the one I was cooking for the boys, and I know it was at least 2 more uncles that were there too. Those 3 together would go in the woods and cut the pulp. And I always wanted to go along with them to the woods. Well, you can imagine, 4-year-old kid, they like to spread out. And there was nobody for me to play with. I was the only one in the house, besides my aunt, all day long. And my uncles kept promising me, once we have a nice day, then they'll take me along. Well, what good, nice day can you expect in Manitoba, Canada in the middle of March? I think they knew that day is never going to come. And I couldn't wait until it would come, so one day my aunt got me all parkered up with a nice park and so on. I could play outside. And I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to go to the woods. And I did. And I remember walking the trail and coming to a Y. And I still remember, as plain as can be, that I looked at the tracks. I just said, which way did they go into the woods? And I thought, I think they went to the right. And I followed that track. And I had gone quite a ways in there. And then all at once I heard a tractor running. Now, believe it or not, we had little enough snow at that time for some reason that they could go into the woods with a Farmall H tractor and a wagon behind instead of horses in a sled. So when I heard it, and that was quite a ways off, but I did my best to try to get back. I still remember, I saw them from way distance, going past that trail. But God saw to it that one of my uncles had looked in there and saw a little kid down the trail. So they stopped and they ran up and got me. And I would have never known how far I was in there, but they said I was at least 2 miles from home. 4-year-old kid. God saved me. I had my 4th birthday while I was there at the camp, and my uncles kept telling me that on my 4th day they'll pick me up to the ceiling and drop me down 4 times, one for each my birthday. I did not look forward for my birthday. And as I remember, when my birthday came, when noon came, they were going to do it right after lunch. I went and hid. I think it was under a bed. I crawled under and hid myself. I was scared stiff. And people, I'll tell you, little kids get scared. And you stop and think, if a little kid gets scared like that, that's no different if you today got scared like that. How do you enjoy getting scared like that? You don't enjoy it. So I really think that we think it as jokes to scare little kids, and I've done it too much too, I know I have, but it's not, it is terrible for a little kid to have to be scared. And they found me and they picked me up to the ceiling and let me down to maybe a foot off the bed, and then they dropped me 4 times. So that was actually not that bad, but I was scared almost scared to death. So. When did you say to close it up at 7:30? Then back to the everyday work, so to speak. My dad and my uncles, they owned a crawler tractor, and they did custom plowing with it. And another one of those situations, called Peter and I asked him what kind, what brand, what name brand, and Peter wasn't totally sure either, but he thinks it was International, and I'm convinced it was not a Caterpillar because I know we would have heard a Caterpillar name, but it was just a crawler tractor. And I always wanted to ride on a crawler tractor. My uncle Abraham was not living very far from us, and that's the day before we had any asphalt out in the country for sure. This was back in 47. And I wanted to go on a crawler tractor. My dad went to my uncle's place, and they were going to bring the crawler tractor to our place. Of course, you drove up the road and right along the road. And I begged my dad, and Dad said, it's too cold. And it was cold. It was. And I tried to convince my dad, it's not too cold, I have good clothes. And finally, my uncle said, go ahead and let him go. I'll take him. I tell you, I wished I would have never gone on that crawler tractor. It was so terribly cold, but I did not admit it. I pretended I was fine shape, but I don't think I've ever been in my life been as cold as what I was that day on the crawler tractor. It was, a little ways, but it was terribly cold. I wish I would have never gone on there, but hey, I was on there and I was too proud to let them know I almost froze to death. We had a lot of snow in Manitoba, and I still do in the winter times. It was nothing unusual that the snowdrift would be just one snowdrift going right up to the second-story roof. You could walk right up on the roof if you didn't sink into the snow too deep. So that was nothing unusual in those days, and probably still that way, I don't know. But I remember my brother Peter and I, Peter's older than I am, like a little over 3 years older. We were playing on the snow, and we were playing on the top of snowdrift, and there must have been a crust on the snow or something, because somehow I broke through and I got into the snow, and the snow was well above my head. I couldn't reach the top. Again, this was 4 years old. And I knew this is trouble. My brother Peter, he was a real comfort to me. He said, Don't worry. He said, I'll run tell Dad, and Dad will go to my uncle. And my uncle was a horse lover. He said, my uncle will come with the horses and he'll pull me out. And it wasn't long, and Dad was there, and he didn't need any horses to pull me out. He pulled me out by himself. So just a few of those memories I have. Anyway, the day came that we were, and I will probably later, I'll say, a bunch of things I should have said, and a bunch of things I said I probably shouldn't have said, but anyway, day came we were going to ready to move to Mexico. And my dad had bought a tractor, and I can't tell you for sure, but I think with the intent of the tractor being to take to Mexico, because I well remember we were waiting on a tractor for a while before the tractor finally arrived. And guess what? It was a John Deere B tractor, brand new. So it's not that I don't know anything about John Deere. I have heard John Deere. In fact, would you bring up that first slide? You can't see the name on there, can you? That was, I think, my grandpa's combine, and that's a John Deere name on it. You just don't see it on here, but you see it on the picture. It was John Deere combine. And you can see it, John, you just see the last N and then Deere yet on the combine bin. Anyway, so I come from a background of some John Deere equipment. My dad was custom planting, I think planting beets, if you know anything about planting beets. And in those days, the planters, now whether it was just a beet planter or what, I don't know, but they had what, I don't know what to call it, but I know there's a special name for it, but they would put a wire, tie it in one end of the field, and they would snap it into the corn planter into a roll of some nature, and that wire had knots every so often, and when that knot would come through that roller would click, and it would make the seed or the beet or whatever it was drop. So that was the way of planting, a precise planting, and that's what my dad did for custom planting. There was, I guess, was one guy in each end of the field. They would move the stake over to the next place where the planter was going to go, and then he would drive the tractor. And that was, by the way, that was a smaller John Deere tractor Dad had bought, and I think he had bought that new too. But I don't know what kind of planter it was. Might have been a John Deere, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, so we were brought up. We took that John Deere along to Mexico. Dad bought a brand new cockshot wagon. And in those days, it was nothing unusual that wagons had springs. Now, how can a wagon have springs? Any of you ever seen a wagon with springs? That was one thing I was amazed when I first came to the U.S. I thought, no wagon had springs. They all were just solid bunks. Well, I don't know if they even make them anymore with springs. The wagons had the springs built into the bunk, go from one side to the other, just like old Ford cars had, if you knew what old Ford cars had. Anyway, and that wagon we towed behind a Ford car to Mexico. Anyone here knows what year model the V8s Ford first came out with V8 engines? Nobody. How many horsepower do you think a V8 engine had in those days, first Ford V8 engines? Anybody like to guess? Come on. Am I the only one that's supposed to talk? Well, I'll give you a hint. A lot of people think Ford was the first one to come up with a V8 engine. Wrong. V8 engines were well known before Ford Motor Company came out with them. But they were built similar to the aircraft engines. They had a block where the crankshaft was in, and then they bolted the individual jugs to the block, and individual pipes or push rods were in to do all that stuff. They were prohibitive, almost prohibitive for a car because of the expense of making an engine. Ford was the one that perfected the engine, made it a engine where it could be used in a car. Well, I think there were cars out before it had them, but that was only for the unknown people. However, the first Ford V8 engine was developed in 1932. 1932 was the first year that Ford came out with the V8 engines, and they had a whopping 65 horsepower. In 1934, Ford revamped the engine a little bit, gave them a little higher compression, and they came out now that was a 75 horsepower engine. And that's what we drove to Mexico with, a 1934 Ford car with a wagon behind it, loaded with our personal belongings, and the farm equipment was shipped by train to Mexico, which it almost seemed like it never arrived. Anyway. Um, Farm equipment, like I said, was shipped by train. And it was way late in arriving. But on our way to Mexico, we stopped. I think it was the first day of traveling. Let me just back off a little bit. Our last night in Manitoba, we slept at my uncle's place because our house was cleaned out, and I think our beds were in a wagon and stuff like that. We slept at my uncle's place, and they had a young puppy. And my folks had bought me a brand new pair of shoes to go to Mexico. In those days, what they called runners. Today, they probably said joggers. And we got into a little muddy situation where I had to leave the shoes outside the house when we came in the evening. Well, you know what puppies like to do. They stole one of my shoes, and I didn't have 2 shoes to go. Brand new shoes, and that was a heartache. That was a real struggle for me. I know I cried over that. And they said if they think they'll find it yet, and because they were going to come too, and there's more people going to come to Mexico, they'll ship them along. But I never saw that shoe again. I'm guessing it was chewed up enough where they decided it wasn't worth taking. But I remember that so plain. And then on our way, we stopped in Carlsbad Caverns, New Mexico. And even though we were on our way to move, my dad thought we had time, and some other people, my uncle, we traveled together, caravan, a number of us together. They stopped there at Carlsbad Caverns, and they went to Carlsbad Caverns. I wanted to go too. Nope, you can't go, you don't have shoes. You have to have shoes to go in there. I don't think that was really the reason they wouldn't let me go, because Mom didn't go anyway. She had a bunch of kids to take care of. But anyway, that was another struggle for me.
How old were you, and how many children were there in that car?
Okay, this Ford car was a big car. It would hold 5 kids and Mom and Dad. Yep, there was 5 of us at that time. And glad. Anytime you have any question, don't hesitate to stop me and holler. I'm open for it.
He asked how old you were.
Oh, okay. I was 5 years old. I turned 5 in the latter part of March, and I am not sure if it was May or June that we moved. So I was just a couple of months into my 5th year. Yep. And
Why did you move?
you'll have to ask my grandpa or somebody. I think it was a what they thought then a move of faith, that they thought the church was going too far, was going to, and may have been some government stuff too yet with the public schools, becoming a little more public schools rather than being able to have private schools. I often wondered if it was really a reason to move, because quite a few people, after years of living in Mexico and even moved to Belize, and they moved back to Canada and lived there again, and then it was conservative enough to move back to Canada. And I don't understand it. I feel the same way about moving to Belize, or similar. Anyway, but I'm assuming that the good Lord wanted it to be, because there is thousands and thousands of Mennonites in Mexico, and so are there in Belize. And if you want to talk about Belize, the main drive behind the economy for a whole country is the Mennonites. So that country would be a totally different country if it wasn't for the Mennonites there. Any other questions? And I'll go on. We arrived in Los Cahuellas. want to bring a picture up of the first building we moved into. How many of you here know Spanish? Now, come on. That, I don't know if it makes sense to you, but that is basically the building that we moved into. It was a building with one opening, and I don't know how wide it was, but it was at least plenty wide enough for a horse, maybe even two horses side by side to drive in. And then all around, there was rooms, and there was like a walk or sidewalk all around. Doors were all from the inside into the rooms, and there was a banister, you might call it a hitching rack, all around where the riders could ride in and tie the horses up there. But there was quite a few families that lived in that little place there. There was a couple other buildings right close by that people moved into until we could build our houses and move away from there and build onto our houses. Now bring up the adobe block. You know what adobe blocks are? Now this was not taken then, this was taken since then, but those are block about a foot wide and about a foot and a half long, give or take 4 inches high, deep. We had to hire Mexicans to make those blocks. And that took several days for them to make them and dry them where you could start building. And imagine to build them, make enough block to build a building. Well, this is what we were waiting for in that building that was called, that circular building, that was called cartuchera. So nobody knows what cartuchera means, huh? You know what? I didn't know either for years. I never knew what that word meant until maybe, I'm just guessing, 6-8 years ago. I dreamt during the night, I dreamt about cartuchera, and I dreamt that's a bullet belt. And I checked up, and sure enough, that's what it is. That's the name is cartuchera, is bullet belt. So, made sense to me right away that a circle like that full of houses, cartuchera, bullet belt. Now, why they had a house like that there, I don't know. Was it a rebel type of territory that they congregated in there? I don't know. Anyway, does that explain anything to you? When the farm equipment finally came, it had, everybody was waiting for that thing and for that stuff, and of course it was taken apart and put in train cars, and then they had to go get it with trucks, and then they brought it to Los Cahuellas. That's what that area was called in the Spanish language. And it was dumped in a yard, and then different people had different equipment. They had to go through there and find their parts. This goes on this goes on this. Put it together before they could plow and plant. And it got too late for them to plant to expect a crop that year. They still planted or sowed a bunch of stuff, but it was, I am in the impression it was all used for feed, to feed the cattle. And then after that, and to us, all the farmers there in Mexico, and I still don't know how in the world they did it, must have been awful fertile soil, because it was nothing but a prairie, that the land, there was no tree in sight except on the mountains or next to it. And yet, we used no fertilizer in those days. There was no fertilizer. Mom used fertilizer in the garden, and I think it was Orthogrow, if I remember correct. We used it in the garden, but in the fields, there was no fertilizer used. Cow manure and chicken manure, yeah. Okay.
Corny, how long did it take you to go from Manitoba to Mexico?
I think it was right around a week. The first day that we traveled, we parked beside a road, and I think it would have been North Dakota, for a picnic lunch. And my Uncle John Friesen, they had a dog with them. And of course, this was a good time to let the dog out for a little bit. and somehow the dog got on the road and the car hit the dog, and that dog screamed and hollered and ran where we came from. They unhooked the wagon that they were towing a wagon to. They unhooked the wagon and ran after, hoping to find it. They never found it. Finally came back and hooked back on, and we traveled without a dog. So I well remember that. But we had, like I said, stopped at Carlsbad Caverns and different places on the border. I think there was a little hole up there, but I'm just saying a week because I think that was close to a week that it was. It might have been a little less than that. Probably was. Okay. So when we were building our house in Mexico, I have a question here again. How many of you have ever seen a badger besides a picture? Seen a badger? Where did you see him? Here in Plain City area? Okay, I didn't know there was any badgers around. Have any idea how fast they can run? They can move. They are kind of wide and flat animals, short legs. You would never think they could run very fast. If you look up on the computer or on the internet, I think it'll say they run as fast as 25 miles an hour. Well, we spotted a badger out in the field, in the prairie, and I was in the car and Dad was in the car, and he ran after that. Made a few circles out in the field, all on boom, 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 boom. And he got the badger and killed the badger. And that's, I think, the only badger that I remember ever seeing. And, yep, he was successful in harvesting that badger. Of course, we didn't eat it. Okay. Now, Mexico, where we lived, it was 7,000 feet altitude, right around there. What will that do to your engines? Anybody had any idea? If your car engine wasn't made for 7,000 foot altitude, you probably, and that was nothing uncommon, people would put different pistons in the engine to give them a little more compression, because at that light air, you just didn't have any power. So there was nothing unusual. Somebody would put a high altitude pistons in the engines. All right? I'm trying to make this an educational class at the same time as informational. Okay. But that's what it was. In the summer times, we would, and I don't remember every day, but we were allowed an hour to quickly eat and then allowed the rest of the time to run to the creek and go swimming for a little bit and then get back home, back to work, which was a very common thing for us in the summertime, especially, not in the wintertime. And I know on one occasion that we had a little extra stream, a little extra water because of rain, and the older boys walked on through, and they told us younger, smaller kids to come on, come on, come on. And my brother Peter had gone across, but he told me, hey, Corny, don't you go. And the other boys said, yeah, come on. And I was, I don't know what, dumb enough. I just said, okay, I'll walk across. I'll, try to make it too. I was barely in the water a little bit, or it was pretty deep. But that stream was strong enough, it washed the sand out from under my feet, and I went down the stream. And it was a rough stream. And my cousin, Clarence, he was probably 6 years older than I was, but he got it together and ran after me and picked me up out of the water, laid me down beside the water, and I was just about dead. I had ingested a bunch of water and won it all. But at least the good Lord saved me there. And I don't know what he thought I had for me, but have I done what he wanted me to do? I don't know. Anyway, so it was a very, very, very close call for me. I don't know if there was another boy that could have made it in that water as strong as the stream was, current was. And anyway, but I survived. And we had quite strong thunderstorms in Mexico. Lightning that was extremely harsh. And you can imagine when you're 7,000 feet, it's a lot closer to heaven, whatever. But I guess it has something to do with how strong your lightning is. The higher your altitude, the more, I understand at least. However, 2 of my uncles were killed by lightning. Both were in the field on a tractor when they were struck. The first one had no children, left his wife a widow. She came over to our place. They lived just across the road from us. She came over to our place right around midnight and begged Dad to go and see what happened, why her husband hasn't come home yet. So Dad, and I think he picked up somebody else, I don't remember who, and they went over to try to find him, and they found him dead. He had a John Deere D tractor, and he was plowing, and he was the one that loved horses. He had gone with the horses to the field, team of horses, had tied him behind the plow, a sign that he was planning to drive up to the front and then come home. But before he got to the front, he was struck with lightning, and the tractor weaved away from the furrow and drove quite a ways into the next neighbor's field and somehow stalled. And he was on front of the wheel on the plow, and I don't know how bad he was caught up and all that stuff, but that was him. And then my Uncle Aaron, he was killed several years later. We were farming together, and my Uncle Aaron, he was married, had, I think, at least 3 or 4 children. And my brother Peter, this was before Peter became a Christian. My brother Peter and my Uncle John, which is the youngest of my uncles on my mom's side, my mom's brother, they had stopped and just talked with Aaron a little bit, and then they just walked away, but just away a little bit, and they heard this just hard lightning crash. And they looked around, they saw him kind of fall over. He got a tractor neutral, kind of fall up almost against a tractor tire, and he went back and fell over the other way and slumped over, and he was dead. So 2 of my uncles, brothers, died of lightning in Mexico. We were also involved in custom plowing in Mexico for the veteranos. Now, nobody knows what that means? Veteranos? Helen, you know what veteranos are? No? Those are veterans, war veterans. In Spanish, similar to what you say in English. If you went to school, you probably had some stories about Pancho Villa or Francisco Villa. And these were veterans, war veterans, that helped him win the Mexican Revolution. Anyway, we were actually hired by the government to plow for these individual farmers that had acquired land because of their faithful support of the country. They didn't have a tractor or anything. We would do the plowing, and after the plowing was done for a little bit, they would come in there with horses and big tree branches and drag them over the field to kind of level the ground out. That was their harrows. I never did find out, I remember, of how they planted them, but they would sow oats, and then they would sell it, and the government would get their money for what they had spent on the planting. All right. Our main crops in Mexico were oats and a bit of corn, especially for silage. Some winter wheat. We had some winter wheat. We had an irrigation system, irrigation pump, a turbine pump. I can say a 6-incher and I can say a 5-incher, and I wouldn't tell you a lie, because The outlet pipe was 6-inch diameter. The turbine itself was a 5-inch turbine. And if I am not mistaken, the well was 200 and some feet deep. And we always had a diesel engine there. If the diesel didn't work, then we hooked a tractor on there with a pulley to drive the turbine pump, and we would flood the fields, not sprinklers. We'd make ditches and dams so far apart, or if it was rows, we raised a lot of potatoes by the truckloads, literally, and we would take X many rows at a time. We would direct the water in there, and then we'd dam that off in the next 6, 8 rows, and then the next 6, Anyway, that was our livelihood there. We did, like, I'm quickly guessing, 8-10-foot wide swath that we would have little ridges and just flood the water through there until we hit the other end, and then the other end would start coming back. So it was fairly level ground there. Time to move to Belize. I got to New York. I will try to run a little bit faster here. We moved to Belize from Los Caballos to Chihuahua by car, then by bus from from Chihuahua to Mexico City by bus, then by train from Mexico City to Veracruz or Escarcia, I'm not sure what it was, and then by a couple of cattle trucks to Belize city border. And when I say cattle trucks, it was worse than cattle trucks. I don't know who had arranged it, but some people somehow had arranged our trips. And we went through a jungle that was not a road, it was nothing but a trail. And some of the boys would jump off the truck and they would walk because it was just as good to move as fast walking as what the trucks could drive a good part of the trip. Hot sun, I mean, it was miserable. No tailgate, but sideboards, your stake beds like, a grain truck would have. Anyway, when we got to Chetumal, the police caught him. And there was quite a delay, but those police were mad at those drivers. They told them cattle wouldn't survive the trip, like you hauled people with, and they were really, really upset with anybody trying bringing people through that jungle. And when I say jungle, that was not tall jungle. Most of it was fairly low, where the sun was just beating all around. But anyway.
How old were you?
I was 14 plus 11 and a half months. I was just a few weeks shy of 15 years. And then, if I remember correct, in Belize we got again, that was a common transportation in those days in Belize. Trucks, benches in, but a roof over the top. So I think that's the way we traveled to Belize, spent a day in Belize. We got there in the evening. We spent the next day where a man would buy the needed groceries and whatnot all to try to make a living. And on the following morning, we left for Spanish Lookout. And that's when we got to the Spanish Lookout, and a couple of days into our being at Spanish Lookout, my sister drowned. The ladies were doing the laundry from the trip, and they were working hard outside because we didn't have a whole lot of washing machines in those days. I think there was one, I don't know what you call them, old type of washing machine that you do this number with. And I think for a better part it was hand washing, stuff like that. Anyway, the ladies were working hard, And then the afternoon, they decided to go to the river to swim. My sister was the only lady that could swim. And they walked into the river where there was very little of a stream, basically no stream. And when they got waist deep into the water, my sister was in the middle, one lady each side. My sister let go, and they thought she wants to swim now. And I think she had said, just help me or something like that, but she just went on and she was gone. The doctors, she was then shipped to the clinic or hospital, whatever, in Cairo, and they claimed she had an aneurysm. So they really warned us not to walk too quick into cooler water when you're really hot. Get your head cooled off first. So that's supposedly what she died of. And those days, the doctors just talked about she had a blood vessel burst in her head, which I think today you would call it an aneurysm. Anyway, it was a rough start, very rough start. We built a number of houses right close to the river for people that the people could at least move in and have a shelter. Again, too many people came too quick, but that's the way it goes usually when you move. And but then we followed a logging trail back into the woods. Different people at different places said, okay, I think this is where I'll start chopping little woods out. Everything was jungle. There wasn't a cleared acre of land on Spanish Lookout at that time. And of course, we had our place we found, and we started building a house there. And then after a few years, we happened to get a hurricane. And that hurricane was so destructive, most people thought, what can they do? We had a chicken barn with, I think, a couple hundred chickens and cages. Of course, the whole barn came down. The cages were down below in the thatch roof, but the whole barn came down on the cages. Didn't kill many chickens, but they were all, the rain we had and everything else, it was a mess. Now, what do we do with chickens? No barn for them. Anyway, it just seemed like all the good luck came to an end. And next thing we knew, the government and everybody was screaming for lumber. Can't you cut us lumber? You know what? That was the best financial boost that the Mennonites had in Belize. The whole country needed lumber to rebuild. And you could sell every piece of board that you could get hold of. And our sawmill, we had a sawmill, it was a community sawmill. And my grandpa owned a planer to make flooring and siding. So that equipment just ran every day. And what we thought was just total destruction was actually a blessing in disguise. Okay.
Hey, Corny, you didn't say why you moved from Mexico to Belize.
Yeah, what about it?
You didn't say, why you moved from Mexico to Belize?
I thought I had mentioned some. I think it was somewhat a concern about the private schools, and I think there was some concern about the church going too far.
For both times,
Well, from Mexico to Belize, that was more or less the government. The government was coming out with Social Security and a price that was, I'm saying this for what I've heard, price that was nearly impossible to pay. And it was said, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it was said that the Social Security at that time, it never happened, but it was said that the Social Security was going to cover your going to theaters and all that stuff, you know. And whether it was rumors or whether it was actually supposed to be, but I think when the government saw that the Mennonites just moved out and tons of them, they dropped that. But they first came in as mandatory. Everybody had to have it. So some people that are 6 foot under will probably have you better explanation than that. But okay. Bring up the next picture. I keep forgetting. That's non-Mennonite way of transportation. Transporting firewood in Mexico. Like I said, I'm a little bit late in bringing that picture up. So, when they had a hurricane, that's when the Hattieville came into existence. There was no building before that, and that's when the government set up long barracks with small rooms for the people that were homeless, that were houses were blown down, washed away by the ocean, whatever, all they could have a place to go. And then that's where the AMA started to check into what they can do in Belize, and that's how Lester's ended up being in Belize. And of course, my occupation down there was running a dozer, started about at the time of hurricane, operating a dozer, D6 dozer, clearing land. And there you go, thank you. And that is the dozer that I would run. In fact, I think it's me on the dozer, and it's my little brother Danny on the side there. Frank, okay. And then it's Lester Gingrich, Joseph, and Rhoda sitting there beside me on the dozer. They would come over every now and then, and they'd spend a day or two with us and so on. So I took them along to where I was working, and I don't think I did any land clearing with them on there, but somebody took a picture. My wife probably did.
This was taken after we were married,
Yeah.
and we were down there.
But that was my occupation. Anyway, so that is more or less in my hobby in those days. What would you guess? You don't guess. I was operating big equipment as my job. My hobby was repairing watches. I repaired many watches. Alarm clocks, wristwatches, you name it. I had even a lathe to make them little shafts when you need a shaft that you couldn't buy anymore. And there was a store in New Jersey that sent me a lot of parts for watches. Anyway, that might seem stupid, but I love to repair watches. And then we got a job at what they call Crooked Tree for the government with a dozer. And of course, we had a Jeep. We bought a Jeep, I don't know exactly when, to go back and forth because we needed to have a Jeep four-wheel drive, and we needed a winch to pull us through. And I pulled a wagon with a number of drums of diesel fuel through the big swamps many a times to go back there to work on that road. Then later, once that road was done, when we got a job for a company out of the U.S., out of Tennessee, and they had more than one company, and one company that they owned was Rainbow Music. So what all that consisted of, I don't know, but that was a company that they owned. I just know they talked about it. And this was at mile 36. And Belize, it was common to talk about mile 36. And that was just 20 miles from Hattieville. And I had a Jeep, as you see on the picture there. That was my Jeep. That used to be shorter. That was short like the Jeep out here. But I couldn't get 2 barrels of diesel fuel on the Jeep in the back, only one, and I needed more capacity. So I cut the whole thing off, and I stretched it out 18 inches, I thought that must be about what the CJ6 was. I couldn't go on a computer to find out how long CJ6 was instead of CJ5. I stretched it out 18 inches, and that was all I needed for the second barrel of diesel fuel in the back. And once I was up here in U.S. and once I was looking around for Jeep, I found out it should have been 20 inches. But we had that Jeep, and the day came that Lester Garages were welcoming some gals to come and help work for them. Well, they had Rita, and the one that just lost her husband a couple weeks ago. And so there was a few gals that came from the U.S., came to help them. And one evening, I decided I'm going to go to Hattieville, and I asked one of the gals if she would accept a ride from me if I want to give her a Jeep ride. And she accepted the offer, and I took her back in the jungle, in the snake-infested jungle, and pulled off the road into the trail, and where I knew she wasn't going to jump out and run, and I asked her for a friendship. And of course, when it's a matter of life or death, you'll do about anything, and she accepted me then as... No, that might not have happened exactly like that, but but at least it makes it interesting to say it that way. So that is where that Jeep came in handy. That's the Jeep that I took her on a ride with. And of course, I wouldn't have to say it, but her sister Lavina was ready to go too, and I said, I only have one seat. This Jeep has one spare seat. So she was left behind, and I was going to offer some other day a ride, but it was got kind of late by the time I got back, and I think she was going to bed. She never got a ride in the Jeep, let's put it that way, sad to say. But it was almost the same color that this Jeep has. It's sitting out here. I had a winch on that one. I had a PTO in the back. I had a pulley that I could run my welder out in the woods and do my welding, repairing. That one had a few options this one had, but this one doesn't have, but it was basically identical Jeep. Bring up another frame there of the car. That was my first car here in the U.S. What car is it? Anyone know? You're cheating. Yeah, it was a 1958 Mercury. I paid $250 for that thing. And it took us around quite a bit. Took us, I don't know how many times to Ontario, Canada, and back, and so on. But that was our first car here in this country. And are there any questions?
I have a question. How many siblings were born in Canada? How many in Mexico? And then how many in Belize? And where was Uncle John born at?
Oh, that poor guy was the last one born in Mexico. There was my brother Peter, Margaret, myself, Klaus, and Annie. 5 of us were born in Manitoba, Canada.
And Margaret's the one that passed away.
Margaret is the one that passed away, just older than me. And then in Belize, now I come from such a big family, I can't count them all. And I'll probably make a mistake. 5, 4, 3. 4 were born in Mexico. John, Frank, Mary, Mary, Liz.
Not Frank.
No, Frank was born in Belize, right? Pardon me?
Ben, Liz, Mary, John.
In Mexico, yeah.
I didn't quite get it.
Tina, Frank, and Danny in Belize.
What's that?
Tina, Frank, and Danny in Belize.
Yeah, Tina, Frank, Danny, that's correct. Okay. I was thinking, I said Danny was born in Mexico.
And
I thought,
Frank and Danny are younger than Pete's oldest two,
Yeah.
right?
yeah. Yeah, there's just, again, sometimes kind of overlap. You have an uncle that is a bit younger than what you are. So, but that happens. Any questions? Any more questions?
Where was that picture taken?
That picture was probably taken in Canada, I think.
And Chris there is driving.
I don't remember for sure where it was, whose place it was taken, but yeah. Chris Sayers' driveway, okay.
So was it after that you were married that you moved to Canada again, to Ontario?
Yeah, yeah. We were working on my papers while we were there.
What took you to Ontario?
You mean why I went to Ontario? A lot closer to Manitoba, Canada. Yeah, because it's just a matter of, crossing here. Okay, any more questions?
So you were a citizen of Canada?
I was a Canadian, yeah. Yeah, I was born in Canada, I was a Canadian, and I'm still a Canadian citizen. I still have Canadian passport and everything. Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll hang it up and bring up the last picture. Uh-oh, that's the second last. That's fine too. I think that's Vernon Troyers and us, and with our oldest daughter, Lisa, in my lap. Huh? And we were in Ontario at the Floral Clock there on the Canadian side. Niagara Falls, yeah. And that clock changes its design. It's all flowers that they do all the numbers with. And all that. They change every year, and I don't remember how many years they said have changed it every year. And it's been there every year different. Huh? Could be. Could easily be. Okay, now we have a little surprise in honor of Leona. Yep, that was in '68. There's the final picture of our trip to Canada.
Remember when we were in Los Angeles?
Vernon, remember that? That was, they had grown some pumpkins, and Vernon thought they were pretty big, and they were fairly big. So that is my conclusion. So.
Thank you, Corny. That was very interesting, very informative. Man's going through a lot of different things. So, yeah, and the Lord spared his life a couple times, so that was part of his journey. So thank you, Corny, for sharing that. Appreciate it. Any announcements? Anything or any more questions that you've thought about that you'd like to ask? If not, Nate.
Corny, when did you start your metal fabrication shop?
When I was 14 years old, that was when, when I was 14 years old, when I made my first 22 pistol in our shop in Mexico. So I've been doing that ever since.
So what year did you actually settle here in Ohio?
67 is when we came back
Yeah.
from Canada.
When? 60.
66, we were married in November of 66.
Okay.
Then we lived in Canada for 9 months until we got his papers.
Okay.
Then we moved back here at 67. We were here a few months, and then we went to Belize just to spend some time, the winter of 67, 68. Then we came back
Okay.
in 68.
Okay. All right. Anything more? She was just saying that, okay, in '66 you went to Canada to do paperwork. Go ahead.
In '66, we went to Ontario and lived up there until he had his papers in the summer of '67.
Okay.
And then we came back for 3 months. And then we went to Belize, drove, and Vernon's went with us, and Ora and Verna and Becky went with us.
Okay.
And yeah. And we spent 3 months there. They only spent a week or two. Then they flew back.
How fast do you think you traveled when you were going from Canada to Mexico? How fast did you dare drive with that wagon behind the car?
Well, that was the day before you had any freeways here.
Yeah.
So we definitely did not drive very fast. I think I could keep up with this Jeep.
Okay.
The Jeep's not made to travel very fast. When this Jeep was designed, it was really not meant to drive fast. In fact, the operator's manual says, don't ever drive more than 60 mile an hour, and I would hate to drive 60 mile an hour with it. But I would guess 45 miles would have probably been
Really?
kind of top speed.
I was just surprised that you could get to Mexico in a week's time from Canada with a wagon behind a car. I must have been going faster than I would have thought you could go, but anyhow. Anything more? Okay, if not, let's stand. Oh, somebody had a question?
Where did you sleep nights?
I remember one place we stayed at a hotel, and I still remember they had a spiral stairway, and there was a number of kids there, and all at once a door opened up, one of the doors opened up, and they asked us to be quiet, they wanted to sleep.
Anyone else? Okay, let's stand. Lord, we thank you for this evening, this time of sharing and hearing about the journey that Corny was in and the way you protected his life. Thank you for that, and thank you that we can expect the same from you, your faithfulness, and that you will watch over us, you will provide for us. We don't always know where the road goes or how it will end up, but we know that you are in control, and we trust you in that. Dismiss us with your blessing. Go with us this week. Help us to be a blessing to those around us. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. You are dismissed.